I want to, on behalf of Fianna Fáil, Minister, welcome the publication of Ireland's new policy for international development, A Better World. But it is essential and important to say that the ambition in this document, that it's matched by resources, political will and implementation to ensure that Ireland maintains its excellent reputation in relation to overseas development aid and assisting developing countries. Our aid programme has helped to address extreme poverty, as the Minister mentioned, in some of the world's poorest nations, and we can be proud of the contribution and difference that we've made in that regard. However, it is evident that considerable and significant work remains to be done if we are to address poverty, gender equality, as the Minister gestured to also, climate change and the promotion of peace and democracy in the developing world. Fianna Fáil is committed to playing our part in ensuring that Irish aid remains untied and continues to be an example of best practice and tangible support to developing countries throughout the globe. As the Minister will know, Ceann Comhairle, unfortunately Ireland has fallen considerably behind in reaching the ODA GNI target. In fact, based on current estimates, our current level of allocation to overseas development aid amounts to approximately 0.3% of gross national income. This is considerably behind a high of 0.59% reached in 2008 when Fianna Fáil was in government. And whilst we acknowledge increases in overseas development aid since 2014, it's clear that sustained financial resources and political will be required if we are to reach this target by 2030. While significant strides have been made in addressing some of the world's most pressing problems, many challenges remain. Conflict, displacement, climate change and entrenched poverty and inequality, these continue to pose considerable challenges. Therefore, how and where we spend our resources remains crucially important, as it always has done. Fianna Fáil believes it's essential to ensure that our aid programme is well managed, that it's effective and that it goes to those most in need. Sufficient safeguards and good governance should be at the heart of our aid programme, so that public money is used properly and in line with the objectives and principles of Irish aid. Fianna Fáil also believes, Ceann Comhairle, that it's essential that Irish aid remains untied, as I mentioned. Ireland has so far largely resisted retying of overseas development aid and expenditure of ODA to the refugee crisis and security measures, and this is to be commended, and I commend the Minister for it. It's very much welcome, and we must ensure that overseas development aid will remain untied, focused on the poorest countries and not diverted to fund refugee costs at home or security and defence activities in the EU or migrants/refugees' countries of origin. We've made a commitment in Ireland to making incremental sustainable progress towards achieving the UN target of allocating 0.7% of gross national income to official development assistance by 2030, and this is again reaffirmed in the new development policy, A Better World. Irish official development assistance in 2019 is forecast to reach almost 817 million, an increase of approximately 110 million and a 16% increase on the allocation announced in Budget 2018. And while we very much welcome this increase, again we reiterate that we're well below the UN target reached in 2008. In a recent parliamentary question reply on this issue, the Government acknowledged that in order to achieve this ambition, difficult choices will be required between competing priorities, especially if economic circumstances change. And this will require ongoing careful planning and consultation with other government departments and stakeholders, and it will be needed if a steady, phased and prudent approach is to be achieved. So we're therefore calling on the Government to work with relevant stakeholders to develop a realistic and workable roadmap that will set out steps as to how this objective can be achieved and will be achieved, because the fulfilment of this overseas development aid target represents an essential commitment on which the poorest nations depend. Several other countries have met this target, and we must actively strive to do the same. In fact, the latest figures from the OECD yesterday confirmed 2018 overseas development aid figures. Ireland's figure for 2018, as I mentioned, is 0.31% of GNI. whereas there were 5 countries that met or exceeded the 0.7% target set by the UN. Sweden, well over it. Luxembourg, again, exceeded it considerably. Also Norway, Denmark and the United Kingdom just achieved 0.7. So what we're seeing overall is a drop in overall overseas development aid to the poorest countries for a second year in a row from Ireland. We agree with the Minister, commend the Minister in relation to the prioritisation of gender equality and recognise that violence against girls and women is the most pervasive human rights abuse in the world today and is hugely damaging. Girls' educational participation, as you know, Minister, continues to be lower than boys, and approximately 1/3 of developing countries haven't yet achieved gender parity in primary education. 15 million girls under age 18 are married every year, or 37,000 each day. An estimated 133 million girls and women have experienced some form of female genital mutilation. Violence is the second leading cause of death among adolescent girls globally. 49 countries have no laws specifically protecting women from domestic violence. Women in the labour market still earn almost a quarter less than men globally, and women continue to be underrepresented in politics and positions of influence. We believe a concentrated effort is required to address this imbalance, and we support efforts to improve opportunities and outcomes for women and girls. Fianna Fáil also welcomes that our international development policy is guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And as a country that was instrumental in the development of the SDGs, we must lead by example and honour the commitments that we've made. We must work to ensure that the SDGs are not just an aspiration but a lived reality. And we therefore need to ensure that policies at national level are in line with these Sustainable Development Goals. We're calling, therefore, on greater collaboration between government departments to ensure that there is a whole-of-government approach to the Sustainable Development Goals. There must be a shared understanding, Ceann Comhairle, of the relevance and importance of these goals, not just for Ireland, but for the world as a whole. We welcome the fact that climate action is one of the core priorities of the new international development policy, but the government needs to examine its own poor record on climate action, on energy emissions and on environmental protection. We cannot in Ireland expect others to do what we are not prepared to do ourselves, and that is demonstrable over a period of 8 years now of Fine Gael-led government. So we believe that the government must do more to ensure that Ireland meets its climate justice commitments, including making progressive contributions to the cost of adaptation, mitigation, emissions reduction measures in developing countries. Ireland must use its voice and its influence at EU and international level to address many of the injustices that continue to exist. We must explicitly press for the empowerment of women, the end of gender-based violence, and push for the education of women and girls. Ceann Comhairle, Ireland is campaigning for a seat on the UN Security Council in 2021, and if we're successful, we should use influence to effect positive change and to compel countries to advance human rights and abide by international human rights law. Ireland is respected throughout the globe for the services that we have provided in terms of peacekeeping, and if successful in this election to the UN Council in securing a seat, we should use it to advance and promote peace initiatives and peace building. In conclusion, Ceann Comhairle, and as the Minister adverted to, Ireland and Irish people rightly are recognised as among some of the most generous in the world. A DOCAS survey found high levels of support, 80%, for increasing levels of overseas development aid. And we need to ensure that we communicate to and engage with civic society on the excellent work that Irish aid does. As a nation with a history of emigration, we've always looked beyond our own borders, but we cannot take this for granted. And we should continue to promote and to encourage an outward-looking Ireland that values our contribution to the tackling of global poverty and injustices. Thank you.